And welcome back to Coaching with the Bible. This week, Tavo on happiness. We have reached a milestone together. This is the 50th episode of Coaching with the Bible, 50. It's been an incredible journey to get to 50, and I really want to take a moment at the outset of this week's episode to thank you all for paying attention, for listening, for chiming in each week, and for tuning in each week, and for sharing your thoughts and your encouragement and your comments and your critiques and your questions. I appreciate every single one of you. I really do. And getting to 50 has been no small feat. It's been a lot of hours and a lot of preparation and a lot of work. And I'm really, really, really happy, honestly, to have gotten to the stage. I never would have thought necessarily that we would have gotten almost through an entire year of the 5 books of Moses, but we are on the cusp of completing those 5, and I thank you all. Before getting to this week's topic specifically, I do want to encourage you to also take a look at the podcast episode 49 that was sent out earlier this week, the personal annual review. I really think it's a worthwhile effort on our parts to take some time for ourselves, about ourselves, for ourselves, to get a sense and an appreciation and a grasp of where we are at this current moment, and to really review and to evaluate and to self-evaluate what was good this past year, what was difficult this past year, what could be different in the coming year, by really taking the time to consider our gratitude, our accomplishments, our quote-unquote failures, our lessons learned, and our goals ahead. Take the hour plus to do that work. I really recommend it. If it's in your feed, if you get the podcast through WhatsApp, then there is a link to it. Also, in the description of that episode, there is also a link to that document. Otherwise, just contact me. I'm happy to share it with you directly. On happiness. Happiness is another enormous topic that we have saved for the end of the 5 books of Moses, and it's something that really comes up interestingly and oddly in this week's portion in the Torah, in the reading in the Bible this week. After going through all kinds of things, Moses has described a very dark and dreary and destructive and horrible set of impending punishments in the event that the people do not follow the word of God, do not keep to the commandments, do not live the life, do not build a society in the land that God has asked of them or commanded them and is expecting of them. And so in this week's reading is a litany of punishments and horrible, horrible events and tragedies that would befall the people if they don't follow through. And so it's understandable to really think that it's simply because people didn't follow or keep to the commandments, do what they were supposed to do and avoid what they weren't supposed to do, that a person would come to these kinds of punishments. But what's interesting is that in verse 47 in the 28th chapter of Deuteronomy, Moses tells them specifically the reason why this is happening to them, or this would happen to them. And the reason is because they didn't serve God out of, the word in Hebrew is simcha, which will translate for now as happiness. They didn't serve God out of happiness. Now, if you take a look through these 613 commandments or any of the other commandments, happiness is one of them, specifically as relates to the fulfillment and the celebration of holidays. That's where the concept of happiness comes in as a commandment. You are commanded to be happy on the holidays. Now, that in and of itself is not an easy thing. To be happy specifically on a certain date or for an extended period of time, for 7 days on those holidays. Good luck being happy completely over the course of 7 days for all hours, minutes, seconds of those 7 days. But in the rest of the corpus of the Bible and the listing of all the commandments, happiness is not a requirement, or so it seems. And one can fulfill all kinds of commandments angrily, unhappily, sadly, without intent, without mindfulness. There's a lot of things, a lot of ways that people could do these things, and yet the Bible here tells us that the reason at the core of it is essentially a lack of simcha, a lack of happiness or goodness in one's heart when that was the case. And so the question is why, and then how does that help us with respect to happiness in general? Because as I said at the beginning, happiness is an enormous topic that's worthy of its own podcast, and there are numerous podcasts that I can recommend with respect to the subject of studying happiness and books and teachers. I'll mention one here specifically in just a couple of moments. But let's first just delve for a minute here what's going on. The reality of it is that the happiness is at the root of what is going on here. And I saw a really beautiful and really simple statement from the rabbi who heads up the local school here in our community. He sends out something apparently every week. This is the first week I received it, actually, because our youngest son is starting in the school next week. And so weekly, apparently, he sends out something on the reading, the portion of the week. And he commented specifically on this subject about happiness. And he said the following: the lack of happiness is not in and of itself the reason for all of these curses or these punishments, but it is the root for all of those, what you would call, violations that bring about these curses. Meaning, at the sub-level, as to why these things occur, why we do certain things, or why we behave in certain manner, is because there's a fundamental lack of happiness, and I'll throw in two other words here: joy and contentment in our lives. And because that's true, it acts itself out, or it shows itself in what we do, in doing things that we shouldn't do, and behaving in ways that we shouldn't behave. To take it out of a religious environment into the secular environment of the general world, a lot of people will comment this, sociologists, psychologists will say that this is the wealthiest, most successful financially society in the history of the world, yet we're also the most depressed and overweight and out of shape and saddest as well. And perhaps at the core of that, and people will say it's simplistic, but at the core of it is a sense that we are not content, or we are not fulfilled with what it is that we are doing and accomplishing in our lives. And so in the vacuum and the lack of happiness is filled by, in its space, with sadness or discontent or these disruptive and negative behaviors and actions in our lives. And so when we talk about the notion of happiness in the Bible specifically, or in our lives specifically, we're talking at a root level, a fundamental level of our being, and we're missing something. Because the truth is that the effort towards happiness is a constant work in progress. It is not something necessarily that we reach or something that we will get to ultimately at some point, but there's a status and a status which we have to sort of begin to approach and work towards with respect to happiness, and we actually have to bring it into the moments. It's an interesting sort of contradiction, dichotomy, in the sense that to be happy, we have to act happy. We have to do the things we need to do happily to get to a place of happiness. If that sounds confusing, and maybe it is. And so I want to sort of use different terminology in explaining it. But the reality in the world is, when you look at the world, there are things that go on in the world that we do and that we count, which maybe are counter to sort of appreciating a greater sense, or bringing about a greater sense of happiness around the world. So when we measure national success, we're usually doing that on gross domestic product or on people's income levels. We're not doing it on their happiness levels. There are places in the world that do measure their country's happiness as a symbol or as a status for how well they are doing, but most of us do not. Saw a talk from Nick Marks, who works, I think, at the New Economic Forum, and they have put together something called the Happy Planet Index, the manner in which they can then begin to show and measure happiness in the world and to promote greater success in nations by promoting greater happiness in those places. It happens to be that on the list, currently Finland is the happiest country in the world, and when one looks as to why Finland is the happiest country in the world, it's a combination of factors, of course, but they are related to a lifestyle, a certain lifestyle, and if you're outdoors, active lifestyle, it's an environmentally sustainable, green, quote-unquote, place in the world. Education system is ranked at the highest levels in the world. The wealth system, the manner in which they manage and produce and support each other in the country, so on and so forth. There's a lot of reasons that Finland is the happiest country, nation in the world. But what I want to appreciate here also is the idea that when the Bible exhorts us to approach things with happiness, let's not confuse the terms. Let's appreciate that there are a multiplicity of terms that sort of flow into that statement of happiness there. And I mentioned them before. I think there are three terms. There's happiness, there's joy, and there's being content. I think the differentiation between them, and I think some of you might disagree in how I define them, I think there is happiness in the moment, there's joy in the manner of performance, and then contentment is sort of an overall sense. Many years ago, I mentioned him before, but I'll mention him now because I want to talk about him a little bit more in the course of the rest of our presentation today. I had the opportunity to study with a professor named Tal Ben-Shachar. Tal Ben-Shachar, I think now, teaches at the Interdisciplinary Center here in Israel, but for a time was at Harvard, and he taught a class on happiness. It was the most well-attended and the highest requested course at Harvard on happiness. He is by trade a psychologist who studies positive psychology. Happened to be, I did not take him. He was not my professor for that course. I actually took a class of his on the Middle East and the Middle East conflict, completely disconnected and unrelated to positive psychology. And I did have the chance, though, to hear many presentations from him, both in person and online, about happiness. He wrote books on happiness, multiple books. And at one point, when I had a course with him on the Middle East conflict, he asked me if I had any sources or resources that discussed the concept of happiness from a Jewish perspective. And it happened that I had a very small volume. I picked it up along the way. I think I picked it up for like $1. It's about 90 pages, and it's called Happiness in the Jewish Perspective. It's 90 pages. It's a collection, a compendium of sources and resources throughout the literature of Jewish literature and Torah literature, biblical scholarship, specifically on the subject of happiness. And he and I had this opportunity to talk about the Hebrew words, what words perhaps means happy versus content versus joy, and which is the one that we're really striving for, and which are the ones that we need to have in every moment. It's a fascinating conversation. I wish I had more time with him. But in one presentation that I did have the opportunity to speak with him and learn from him, he talked about the idea that we're really shooting for some sense of contentment in life, and it's very hard to reach. But the way to get to content was through imbuing and endowing our moments with joy and thinking about doing things with a sense of happiness in those moments. So joy and happy were more immediate, and content was sort of the long-term overall state that we want to reach. And so when one looks back at the text actually in the Bible, one can sort of appreciate that in that text specifically, and appreciate that all three really fit into it, in the sense that if you do not perform the commandments with joy in the moment, that you do not imbue them with a sense of happiness in the approach towards those moments, then obviously you're not going to be overall happy or content in life, but also you will have failed to appreciate what is required to bring into those moments, and that's, as a result, the consequences, all these different curses. And if overall, if you do not have a greater sense of contentment about your life, then also it will lead to a corruption of the community and society and the home that you are trying to build, and it will lead to all kinds of violations and transgressions and so on and so forth, which ultimately will lead to a destruction of the society in which you live. But I want to share with you a quote, which I think is super important, and that leads to the more practical side of happiness. We could delve into more deeply the psychology of happiness and how one gets to happiness in life. The truth is, it's a bigger subject than we have time for right now, and I'm running short on time as it is. But Dr. Ben Shachar made the following statement. Happiness is a continuum, not a binary. You can keep reaching new levels of happiness throughout your life. If you just become 3 to 4% happier, you become more innovative, a better listener, more engaged. This is extremely important for 21st century leaders, which all of you are. Meaning that if we can work on not being 100% happier, that might be too big. And as you're seeing through all the different talks and coaching with the Bible over the weeks, is that we try to get to, as James Clear calls them, atomic habits, the smaller actions that lead to the bigger gains in the long term. We're looking to try to get 1% happier or 3% happier, which leads to so much other greater benefit in life. And so instead of sort of sitting here and dwelling and mulling over, why am I not happy? Why things aren't so great? Why am I not joyous? Why am I not content? There are ways to imbue and endow each moment with greater sense of happiness and greater sense of joy and greater sense of contentment. And so Tal Ben Shachar prescribes the following 4. The first one, he says, to greater immediate happiness is permission to be human. What that means is to appreciate and to accept that we go through a variety of emotions in the course of our day and our week and our lives, and we have to accept that those are true. Accepting that we run the spectrum of emotions and that it's normal and that it's human actually helps us get to better places. How can one appreciate happiness, contentment, joy without appreciating the sense normally that there is a space called unhappiness or lack of joy or sadness? And so permission to being human is important. Permission to accepting our emotional status as to where it is also very human. And as he said appropriately, there are only 2 kinds of people who don't have a sense of their emotions. One are those that are dead, and the other are the psychopaths. So to really appreciate sadness and to appreciate happiness and to appreciate joy is to be human. And so from an actual effective state is to do something proactive, so do the following thing. As I said, I've tried to be more practical with the coaching with the Bible here. 15 minutes for 3 consecutive days, write something down that makes you unhappy. You thought I was going to say happy. No, I want you to write down something that makes you unhappy. Write it down. Don't judge it. Notice it. What is making you unhappy today? What's something that makes you unhappy today? I've talked a lot about gratitude and writing down the things that give you a sense of gratitude and grace and appreciation. So for 15 minutes, for 3 consecutive days, write something down that's making you unhappy. Really write it, really unpack it. Number 2, in his overall sense of greater happiness, is be where you are. We've talked about intentionality, we've talked about mindfulness. I think this is in that same space. For 3 consecutive days, for 5 minutes on the commute to work or the commute home from work, or just, if you're just home, turn off the phone. Sense where you are for a few consecutive days. See if it increases or if it changes over the course of a few consecutive. Do you want to do it for a week? Then you can measure it over a week. That's great too. But be where you are. So first is permission to be human. Second is to be where you are. The third one, not going to be a surprise. There's no question about the correlation between happiness and healthiness. Is the sense that being healthy will lead to a greater sense of happiness. I think that's certainly true. So exercise is that third one. In the last few months, I've been exercising a lot more. I feel a lot better physically, and I think my overall feeling generally, although I might still look curmudgeonly, might have that look on my face, the truth is that because I am healthier, I think I'm healthier, I definitely feel happier. So the sense of even just walking for a few times a week, again, intentedly and mindfully for the sake of being healthier, as Nike has it, just do it. Go out and do that 3 times, 30 minutes during the course of the week. Just walk. Not asking anyone to lift weights or to run on a treadmill or hire a personal trainer or go take out a gym membership. Just go outside and walk. The fourth one is one that we've talked a lot about, is that gratitude. I can't emphasize it enough, but really having a sense of appreciation of the good in life. And as Tal had said many years ago, and I take it with me all over, it's a great quote: when you appreciate the good appreciates. I mentioned it earlier on in Coaching with the Bible, way back, talking about gratitude. When you appreciate the good appreciates. You can understand that however you like. I take it in two ways. One, more good comes to you. Two, you get a greater sense of appreciation of what that good actually is. And the way to do that is to really take the time to consider gratitude. So the one that I use an app called Presently. And at the end of every day, I take a few minutes just at the end of the day. I try to write down 5 things that I'm grateful for that day. It could be the same thing every day, but and some of them are things that continue to appear in the list, but other things change. So try to give something new to it every day. So try to do that. And then at the end of that exercise, review what you wrote. These things, very practical pieces of advice, really help to get us to a better space of happiness. And the last 2, giving to others and then sharing with others, really important. Being connected, not living in a vacuum, not living by yourself, not being separate and removed completely from society, having connections, having relationships, being with other people, sharing in their joys and in their happiness, and then relatedly, but slightly differently, also giving to others. The notion that when you give and you share with others does have a positive emotional effect. It has actually a positive chemical effect in the body and in the mind, and creates a greater sense of overall happiness and joy in one's life, and can lead to that space of contentment. So as we close in on the end of the Jewish calendar year, and we're closing in on the high holidays, and we've talked a lot about a lot of different things this week, we have spent the time focusing in on happiness. And so I wish you only happiness and only health and only a good and great life and contentment, a real sense of appreciation, of accomplishment in your life, and to take that with you into the following week. That is Coaching with the Bible for this week. See you next week.